Hello, everyone. I'm Chris Campbell, Superintendent of Schools. I want to first thank the local scene, PAC TV, for having us back to dive deeper into the components of our budget. Today, we're going to talk about something that often flies under the radar when we think about our schools: routine maintenance. It's vital for our ongoing success of our education system, and it directly impacts the financial health of our schools. So we'll explore why taking care of our school facilities should be a priority for families, taxpayers, and the community. So what I'd like to do now is just introduce our guests, starting over here. Matt Durkee, who's our Director of Facilities, Michelle Badger, Chair of the School Committee, and Adam Blaisdell, who is our School Business Administrator. So I'm going to start with you, Matt, if you don't mind. So when we talk about routine maintenance in our schools, particularly our school system, what does that entail?
Sure. Well, it starts with employees in our various positions throughout the district, our second shift custodians, our first shift custodians who open the building, but the day-to-day removal of trash, sweeping, cleaning the floors, maintaining HVAC filters so we have clean, fresh air in the building, but it also ties in with our contracted services. So, we've got elevators, generators throughout our 13 schools. And in order to prevent catastrophic failure on some of these very expensive assets we have, we enter into preventative maintenance programs. So we'll have contractors come out, for instance, for a generator on a monthly basis. They'll run through the operation of it, make sure there's no red flags of failure, and we proceed that way. Same with our elevator systems. Our boilers, we all have preventative maintenance annual programs set up. The thinking with that is a little money spent beforehand will save us a lot of money in the end.
Yeah, can you give an example of that?
So, yes, for our first boiler maintenance program, as it has been underway this heating season, some of the past preventative maintenance programs haven't been as robust. So what we're finding in some of our boilers is the lack of maintenance is requiring more repairs, higher level repairs, and more expensive equipment. So with this annual boiler maintenance program, we're really getting deep into condensating pumps, condensate lines, the boilers themselves, and making those necessary repairs now, which will benefit the life of the boiler going on 5, 10, 15 years.
Imagine that's quite costly to replace a boiler if it was to completely
Absolutely.
shut down.
Yeah, we would generally, when replacing boilers, we would be looking towards the Massachusetts School Building Authority to enter into a project with us because the cost is quite large.
So you talked about the skilled craftsmen, our custodians and maintenance workers, and they're essential to our operations. Can you talk a little bit more about that and the structure that's in place?
Especially, we have our, when I spoke to the school committee at the beginning of this week, I kind of referenced, the roles and what everyone does, and I reference our custodians as being the bedrock of the facilities program. I mean, these are the individuals that are in there every day, cleaning up after the day's events and resetting it, a new stage every day for our community to come in and use and then repeat. On the back of that, behind the curtains, which we have, are our skilled craftsmen. And these are licensed plumbers, electricians, HVAC technicians, carpenters. This allows us, and we are very fortunate in the Plymouth School District to have these assets as part of our employment, where these are union members, part of the collective bargaining agreement in the Plymouth schools, and we are able to employ them, and instead of contracting out various HVAC, plumbing technicians, we're able to utilize our own employees. So there is a massive cost savings there with our hourly wages compared to prevailing wages that is primarily used in the industry. And then we have the efficiency of it because our skilled craftsmen are in and around our 13 buildings every day. They're aware of the different issues we have. They're able to communicate those effectively with the head custodian, the building principals, as well as the facilities department, and we can come up with game plans in order to work with them to create and complete these projects in-house, which ultimately is saving us, the town, a lot of money instead of going out for contractors on every project. There are instances where projects are too large of scale or too complex where we have to employ contracted services. But having the skilled craftsman part of our tool bag allows us to, number one, create more space within our own footprints in some of these buildings. As services increase, student populations increase, this allows us to expand our services within the current footprint so we're not incurring some of those high costs of building a separate structure.
Yeah, and I think one thing that the public really doesn't understand, not only do we have thousands of students that are in our buildings using our facilities on a daily basis, but we also have thousands of people from the community that come in and utilize our buildings as well. I don't know if you could speak to that, Dr. Blaisdell, but in terms of the building use and just the volume of usage. And
Sure. Our high schools get a lot of use. On the athletic fields, they get a lot of use. At both of the two high schools, we have the PACs, the Performing Arts Center. Those get a lot of use on a weekly, monthly basis. A lot in the spring, but throughout the year. I know that the Phil is even talking about using our sites as well and our PACs. So there's a lot of use on a daily basis. And our custodians do a great job working with them to, we have a building use coordinator who works with them to make sure insurance is set up and make sure that bills are paid, to make sure that we're getting the revenue from them. And it's really not really revenue, it's revenue that goes right back to the buildings to repair the buildings.
Can you talk a little bit about that? So we have these user fees that we charge to utilize our buildings and how we put that back in.
Sure. All of the money that comes in from building use goes directly back into the buildings. A lot of times custodians are needed, so the money that comes in for custodian use goes right to pay those custodians. So it's not necessarily impacting our budget for custodial use. In regards to the building use fees, we've done a variety of different projects with the money that comes in from those projects. Just to think like some of the work that's been done at the fields to keep those fields updated and just maintained. Because if you tear part of the turf that's at the two high schools, they have to cut it. You have to bring a company in to cut that out to then replace it. So there's been some work there. And we've had some low spots on some of the turf fields, and we've had to bring in a company to kind of build that back up. The public wouldn't necessarily know, but because you don't see necessarily some of the repairs. We've done some HVAC repairs with that money and just general maintenance. The basketball courts, that's wood floors that need to be refinished over and over again. And just like your house, the more and more people you have on those wood floors, it wears them down, so they need to be refinished. That money's been used to refinish those, and again, not impact the budget. There's been a lot of different projects I can't think of necessarily off the top of my head, but those are just a few.
Those are some great examples.
Athletic-wise, but it's gone beyond athletics too, so it's gone to other parts.
Absolutely, the Performing Arts Center, lighting, and other things that help to, again, as we're generating revenue from usage, to kind of put that back in to maintain our buildings. I think that we'd all agree that if you go into either of our high schools, Plymouth North is in its 13th year, and believe we're in the 7th year at South High School. They look brand new.
Yeah.
They really do, and I think it speaks to our maintenance crew, our custodians, and the work that they do to constantly stay on top of things, because things, new buildings, things are easier to highlight when there's a problem.
Yes.
You see it a lot easier than an old building, right? Which kind of takes me to the next discussion, is the age of our facilities. We're very fortunate to have two beautiful high schools that we were able to obtain through support of the MSBA. We have one middle school that is, I think, in its 25th year, if I'm not mistaken, 1999. And then we have some old buildings. We have a lot of buildings that are in their 50s, 70s, and over 100 years old, including Central Office, which was built in 1893 or 1892, I believe. So with that, I would assume with old buildings, like old homes, come challenges. So let's talk about that a little
Yeah,
bit.
sure. They do come with challenges. New buildings come with challenges as well.
Sure.
The technology is so advanced in some of these new buildings. It's hard to wrap your head around. But as far as the older buildings, it's a more simplistic approach to that. Roof, building envelope, your hardscapes coming up to the facilities, making them accessible to all the people in our communities. I think that's one of some of the greater challenges we face in the larger buildings is ADA compliance. These buildings were built in a time where there weren't these regulations, and now we have these regulations. And if we want to safely have our community come in and out of these buildings, we need to bring them up to these type of standards. But then, you look at an older building and you see all of these upgrades that are needed to make it accessible to the public. And that gets to the point of like, where does that outweigh a new building? Or are we putting in too much money into an older building where, as we've seen in some other town projects, it may be less expensive to build new and move on? And I think that's where we find ourselves with two of our community schools.
Yeah.
And I think, Matt, to also follow up on that, some of our old buildings come with a little bit more complexity when we're fixing them because there are certain issues that we need to address and make sure we take precaution to address as well, which then adds cost as well.
Cost, right. Some of our older buildings have asbestos in it, as most old buildings in the Commonwealth of Mass do. We have techniques to work around that. But as you said, Dr. Blaisdell, there is a significant cost added to some of these projects because of old building material.
And even our new buildings, like, again, I think you mentioned it, people think they're beautiful and so forth, and they're easy to maintain, but I think you said this with the technology that's in these buildings.
Right.
So sophisticated.
And you sometimes have to bring somebody in order to deal with some of the issues on a day-to-day basis because of the technology that's involved with them, even like the heating. We've talked a lot about heating and air conditioning, and sometimes those controls are not always the easiest to
Right, and
deal with.
humidity levels. That's in the newer, more technologically advanced HVAC systems. Humidity is one of the main concerns and is where you're trying to control the most. So there's a lot of sensors, which, if one sensor's gone, if the programming's off, you were working with one contractor at the start of the school, now they're no longer in business, so now you're kind of left. We're left trying to figure that out.
But within our building too, there's a lot of HVAC issues in both the new and the old. The
Absolutely.
old presents its own problems, like at South Elementary with their HVAC. I know they've struggled. Is that right?
Yeah, South Elementary.
Yeah.
We have capital planning for the replacement of all those rooftop units, and that example of that school is a great example of material availability. Now, those rooftop units are very unique to that building. You can't go out to a general contractor and get those rooftop units. They're specifically custom designed for that. The current ones, the company is no longer in business, but in a process of following through with this capital plan, we have since been in contact with the original manufacturer, and we have followed that trail to another engineer who has come up with the construction documents for the replacement of those RTUs.
Nothing's ever easy, is
No.
it?
Nothing's ever easy in facilities.
No, thank
so
you
I
for
know-
tracking it
yeah.
down. I mean, tracking it down, that's
But it's a challenge,
Yeah.
and problem solvers
Puzzle.
like challenges,
Yep.
and that's what we do in facilities every
Yeah.
day
Yeah.
is identify the problem and figure it out.
yeah.
And I know that we talk about capital projects, and you've mentioned a few of them today already. In an effort to try to do this very strategically, back in 2021, in July, we did a facilities condition assessment. I don't know if you can speak to that a little bit, Matt. Like what that really
Absolutely.
encompasses.
So when I first came into the role a little over a year ago, this was kind of my coffee table literature, and
reading.
it's a great it's a great piece here. It identifies a lot of things throughout our district, some priority levels. The way it prioritizes some of our deficiencies is great. But in facilities, as everything, and we're talking about budget, it comes down to numbers. And one of the struggles in facilities is to identify, once you identify the problem, identifying a dollar amount to that problem. So there are a lot of positives with this. The one negative I would say is that it uses national pricing as an average. And for the Northeast, that doesn't do us anything because we've got snow, negative temperatures, we've got high temperatures. We have certified payrolls, we have prevailing wages that far outpace the majority of the
National
country.
average.
I mean, we're looking at California or New Jersey that will come close to us.
Yeah.
So it's a great book because it clearly identifies different areas of concern throughout our 13 schools, lists them at a priority level, and then it's just left to us to now, come up with costs for these various projects.
I did like how it gave you the if you did it today, this is what it would cost, even if it's a national average. But if you put it off, this is what it's going to cost. And when I read through it, I learned a lot.
Yeah.
A lot of construction terms I never thought I would.
Putting
ever
those
know.
escalators in when things are pushed off
Yeah.
another fiscal year. And I don't know if we could talk about that, Adam, like the 10-year capital plan that we put together. So we try to use this as a guide, obviously, because we're sort of held to the funds that are available through the process at the town, the available capital. I don't know if you can talk about that for the public, just how capital works.
How capital works. In the past, what we had done with capital is we had really reached out to our buildings and asked the buildings to kind of give us ideas in regards to what capital needs there are. This facilities assessment really kind of changed that practice, though, because that facilities study helped us identify what were, as Matt said, the top priorities in regards to what should we address first. The one thing it didn't address, and it couldn't have addressed at that time, was really COVID and some of the things that we did with our HVAC, because some of the filters that we used really caused some strain on some of our HVAC. So that kind of made HVAC rise to another level.
Yeah.
But it could not have identified it at that point in time. So working with Matt and his staff, what we try and do is we try and line out a 10-year capital plan, and again looking at what the priorities are in that book and kind of seeing what needs to be addressed and then prioritizing them of when they need to take place. And then obviously anything else that comes up in the meantime that is now a struggle, it's trying to get it in. The problem also is if, as we look at that 10-year plan and we develop that 10-year plan, if we don't do something one year, it gets pushed to the next year. And so what ends up happening is this becomes kind of, I don't want to say null and void, but it pushes things off and then
becomes less relevant.
Yes, and it could become a bigger problem, I'm assuming, because if you don't address something
that
early,
10-year timeline is now a 20-year timeline, and as you said, if you don't address something, it becomes a more costly, bigger issue sometimes.
I'm glad you brought up the timing in relation to capital plan, because that is something that is very difficult for us to manage when it comes to being funded by capital plans and which projects that we're going to seek to complete. Because when we're developing the capital plan in fall, early fall, and then we're going through the winter season, meeting with various committees, and then ultimately coming down to Springtown meeting to be supported for these projects. Once we're given that funding, that's already entered into the building season, and a lot of the contractors already have their schedule completed for that summer. So that is one. It's a very time sensitive issue when you're dealing with trying to complete a project the next year, where you're receiving the funding the prior year, because a lot of times we do our major projects during the summer when the school is out of session, so you're called the summer slammer. If we're getting our funding in, late spring, it's hard to utilize that funding for a project that summer, especially large-scale projects where it has to go out to a public bid,
Yeah.
where all these contractors already have their schedule set for the summer. They may put in a bid, but it might be a bid, I don't want to do this project.
And we faced that
we did.
this past
We
summer
did.
with one of our projects. That the prices came in much higher than we expected.
So it was a Manomet roofing project, and we had been working with a roofing expert on developing this plan. And that's an element of these bids where you don't know which direction. There's so many different facets to a project, whether it's plumbing, masonry, roofing.
Right.
On this particular project, the numbers for the roofing project came in right where we wanted it to. It was an additional masonry project because the elevation of the roof went up. It tied into a windowsill, and that had to be worked on. We got, we don't want to do the project pricing for the masonry, which put us over the budget for the roofing project, and we were able to have to pull back.
Yeah, so we delayed that.
Yeah.
We delayed it, and one of our capital requests for the upcoming spring town meeting is that additional cost.
Yeah.
Right.
And again, that's tough because we're working off a pricing that we're not 100% sure whether it was really accurate or not, and so we're working off of that.
And that goes into the, or at least that supports the idea of trying to bid these projects at an earlier stage, because that's where there's going to be real savings, because these contractors are not in a position where they already have their schedule filled, and they're like, well, if we can get this work, that's just gravy for us. So they'll throw some large number out there.
Yeah.
So there's a timing issue with it that we're working through.
And we're working with very limited funds. Let's
Yeah.
be
Correct.
honest, right?
Yep.
So when we look at the facilities condition assessment, even with the national prices, we're looking at millions and millions of dollars recommended on an annual basis. We're getting a couple million on average. So that makes it very difficult to do what we really need to do in terms of roof projects, HVAC, any masonry work, because most of our projects have been to sort of preserve the envelope of our buildings and ensure safety, as well as ADA compliance. Those have really been the sort of the three buckets that our projects have fallen in. So, Matt, since you've been here, making some other recommendations on how, knowing that funding is limited, where we're looking at routine maintenance, we're looking at roofs that need repairs, HVAC that needs repairs. You've sort of suggested a different approach to that. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. It's well, as far as the roofing is concerned, working with this roof expert in my previous role in a different district, and then working with him here in this capacity, is it's a project called a roof restoration. So it is it's utilized on a flat roof. So you have your PVC or rubber roofing, flat roof, and if it qualifies for this restoration, it costs a third of the price to do a full roof replacement. There's a whole bunch of benefits. There's environmental benefits, there's financial benefits to this, but you have to identify these roofs in a specific time frame. Because you're not increasing the insulation, and when you do a roof replacement, you're taking everything from the metal decking of the roof all the way up. So all of that insulation, all that rubber, it's all coming up and being thrown in a landfill, only to be replaced with the same type of material. With this roof restoration, if it qualifies, what that does is it keeps the existing insulation and all that forever material on the roof, and it adds a liquid level of a polymer, which is self-leveling, and it's 3 coats, and that will give you a 20-year roof warranty on top. So you say you were at year 20 of your roof, of your rubber roof, and you're starting to think about a roof replacement. I mean, we're talking tens of millions of dollars. With this, what you would do is you would do an infrared scan of these roofs, and you can see, and an infrared scan is done with a drone, and it's done right at sunset. So the thinking is, if there's any water penetration into an existing roof, that insulation is going to hold that moisture. And then as the sun throughout the day has heated up the roof, the setting sun, the surface cools. But the moisture that's locked inside of your foam insulation will show on an infrared
You
scale.
get the best readings. Yeah.
We'll get the best
Yeah.
reading.
Makes
So
sense.
that's when you take that snapshot of the infrared of the rooftop, and the manufacturer then analyzes this data. They do core cuts where they'll core down into the roof insulation and see the integrity of it. If it matches all of this manufacturer's requirements for the restoration, then they will then proceed with a warranty on a restoration, and then we would then bid it at that price, bid that project.
That's great. So it's not only environmentally friendly, but also fiscally responsible.
And timing friendly. There's low VOC with this material, so you could actually
in schools.
apply this when it is open to the community. So it again, back to that timing of bidding projects,
Yes.
this gives us more time.
To use, yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Matt, the other thing to kind of think of too that you've kind of targeted as well is knowing that we're only getting usually between $2 and $3 million a year in capital requests, and we probably this year have $9 million, I think, is in capital requests.
That's
Sure.
right.
What you've done is also you've tried to. We have a South Elementary School HVAC project that we know would cost over $5 million to complete that project, and it needs to be done. But you've kind of looked at, okay, let's do part of the project because we know we won't necessarily get $5 million.
Right.
It's not necessarily available. The town just doesn't have the funds to do that.
Right.
But also you looked at HVAC too. You had someone come out and look at all the HVAC and kind of do a priority list. If you look at that priority list across the district, you're probably looking again at millions of dollars of
Millions.
just repairs. But you've really tried to look at, okay, you know what, let's maybe target $500,000 and address the most priority needs on those HVACs and kind of
Get
take
like another 5 years out of.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
So, and again, back to the timing. When you do these large projects, it takes a lot of time to get the whole bid together, to get it out, to receive bids. So, if we we're looking at HVAC, and if we're financially supported for that 500,000 capital plan HVAC project, that it's kind of a broad approach of HVAC. It would include controls. That's another aspect of HVAC is just the controls themselves. There's updates needed with that. But to Adam's point of we have these multi-million-dollar HVAC repairs, we're not going to get that funding. We don't anticipate that. So we have to plan appropriately within those guardrails. And by breaking apart projects into smaller, more manageable pieces funding-wise, that allows us to move around the district and not focus just all cap plan funding on one school, because we have 13 and we want to keep our 13 school communities happy and excited about new things to their school. So it will be strategic, and we will be addressing all 13 schools with that type of $500,000 capital plan approach for HVAC. And then you hit on COVID, and I don't mean to bring it up again, but
none of us want to.
But when we were operating in COVID and making HVA decisions, there was no definite way to go. There was a lot of recommendations out there. So districts took different avenues. It was all in an effort to keep the community safe. So, I applaud any efforts that were taken in order to achieve that. But that's the nature of facilities. You try to make improvements, you take note of what went wrong, what doesn't work, and you make improvements on that. So we're constantly learning and we're constantly improving.
Yeah, because the reason the COVID impacted the HVAC, I know you kind of mentioned it a little, but because the MERV filters we used were too powerful. I don't know if that's the right word. Too filter, they filter too much.
It's like so we have, as we discussed, we have all these different aged facilities, and the equipment attached to those facilities mirrors their age generally. So you have 100 years of different types of HVAC. There's no one filter that is going to fit
Yep.
all those
Yep.
HVACs. They're not designed for it.
And
So
you just shoved it right in.
so yeah, that was the issue with the filters. It was the thickness of the filters.
Yes.
And at the time, it was sold as the COVID killing
Yes.
filter.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't you buy it?
Yeah. We all. I mean,
So, but
probably most
Yeah.
school
you know,
districts.
we were, we're trying to make the best decisions possible with little knowledge and in a very short time frame. We're
Yep.
opening these schools. That was the priority, to get our schools open.
Yep.
But the most simple description of it is it's just a thicker filter that some of these older units just didn't have the capacity to move air through it.
Yep.
So it put extreme tax on motors,
Mhm.
compressors,
Fans.
and
Yep.
so now that's what we're working through.
Yeah. Thank you.
No, that's
course.
good. It's important to mention that.
Yeah.
In terms of like just the operational budget of the facilities department, how much money is allocated to facilities approximately? When you look at, aside from like our staffing, just the you can
Yeah.
speak to that.
Well, if I could reference what I spoke at school committee meeting,
One.
and
Came out to be about $1.11.
$1.11. Yeah. I
well,
mean,
that was
stuck
just in
with me.
supplies.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was
Yeah,
like
I think what
three-
is important to know that we have about $3 million for supplies and materials for the entire district. That
Mhm.
includes curriculum supplies, general office supplies, as well as our facilities and maintenance supplies. So,
Yeah, I was just so impressed by the square foot number that how much we spend. I mean, that's incredible
Yeah,
use
so the
of
gross square foot for
Yes.
the 13 of our schools,
Yes.
including some of our off buildings. We've got a maintenance facility down at South High School. There's a couple other sheds, barns. 1,424,795 gross square feet of building space. And when we do you know? So I have a figure of
give us
what the
stats.
facilities department salary and supplies and repairs are per square foot is $4.46.
So that's
Amazing.
Per square foot.
That's the individuals and the materials they have.
Correct. That
To
is
maintain.
everything in the facilities funding world.
Right.
That is what we are spending in our buildings per square foot, $4.46.
And when you look at the resources that our staff have in order to maintain each square foot, it comes to $1.11 per square foot, approximately.
Yes.
you said. Imagine that 1.4 million square feet, $1.11
I mean,
per square foot. Imagine like
you couldn't do
kinda
that
put
in your own
that-
house.
right. So if you have a 1,500 square foot house, you're spending $1,500
A
to
year.
repairs, cleaning, everything from for your facility.
Yeah.
And also another point to that is the acreage.
Yes.
I mean, we are the largest land area in the Commonwealth in
Yeah.
Plymouth.
And
So
as
I
a
mean,
school department, we have
in our school department, like if you from driving from West Elementary to Indian Brook, that's a 43-minute drive.
Yeah. It's very specific.
How I
I believe we have
I like it.
it's
But
43 minutes. yes.
my point of that is we have
Sure.
323.22 acres
Yeah.
in the
Yeah,
district.
so
Yeah.
over 323 acres
Yeah.
to also maintain.
And
for
and our
groundsman
funding for
facilities.
that equates to $830 per acre a year.
Yeah, I just got my
That's-
water bill, and so they're just thinking about like again, if you have an acre of land and
Yeah.
had $800 to
And
maintain that.
I'm sure at your acre of land at your house, you're not putting ice melt down
yeah,
on your driveway. You're not running a plow blade over it, replacing plow equipment,
Yeah.
fuel for the plows,
Yeah.
fuel for the snow blowers. Yeah, it's involved, and we maintain all of our 13 schools.
Even our
Yes.
oldest 114-year-old buildings are very well maintained,
beautiful.
clean. They look beautiful, and again, knowing the dollars and cents that go towards our staff, it tells you that it's the staff that
Yeah.
are
It
really
is.
Yeah.
It is the
doing that
staff. We're
work.
so fortunate here. We have
Awesome. Yes.
tremendous staff that really care. They're passionate about their buildings. They're passionate about contributing to improving the community and keeping it safe. So our community's children can come to our buildings, feel safe, feel free to play and not worried outside. So yes, we're very fortunate to have the staff that we have in the Plymouth schools.
I think it's also a good point to also talk about how we partner sometimes, like where you were talking about snow removal. Sometimes the town will help us with snow removal.
Absolutely.
And, they use our skilled craftsmen sometimes to help, in different
Yeah,
parts
thank
of
you
their.
for bringing that up
Yeah.
because the DPW
Yes.
is such a huge help for us in the
Mhm.
schools. We have an excellent line of communication. I feel bad. It's usually us asking them. I wish we could reciprocate that
Yeah.
more. But they have that heavy machinery, more of it.
Yeah.
But in some of during the winter months, we're in constant communication with the DPW about planning the night before, how we're going to place our assets and our employees. So yes, we're very fortunate to
Yeah.
have such a great, helpful, professional DPW in the town.
Yeah, it's a great relationship for
Yes.
sure. So, kind of getting back to the finances. So, we have limited capital. We have a limited sort of supplies and materials that go towards our routine maintenance. What happens when something breaks down and we haven't allocated? Like, what do we do, Dr. Blaisdell? I know what we do, but could you
Yeah,
tell
right.
tell the
We all-
public what
yeah.
we do?
Obviously, we need to address it. I mean, we can't have our kids coming into a school that doesn't have heat, or we can't have our kids coming into a
Water.
school without running water, or without a broken glass window that might have happened over the weekend, or just sometimes it just happens. So what we end up doing is we fix it. We make sure the facilities department does a great job to address it. If our skilled craftsmen can address it and to minimize cost, we do. Sometimes we just don't have the staff in order to have our guys and ladies fix it. We just don't have enough. So we have to contract out. So we contract and we fix it. However, it comes at a cost for the rest of the district. We end up having to move money or not doing something else that we were planning on doing, either through computers or other instructional materials, or filling a position. Sometimes we don't fill a position because we need to make sure we address the needs of our
We need to
buildings.
transfer those funds so that we have to have the buildings up and running. We need heat. We need water.
Yes.
We need electricity. These basic needs, right? And yeah, it comes at a cost. So
And that'll happen through our facilities budget as well, where now we had a certain small dollar amount spec'd for different projects at some of our elementary schools. And when we take these big hits, those are going to have to be pushed off.
Yeah.
So we talked about aging facilities. We talked about, and you mentioned it a little bit, Matt. We're talking about like trying to work with MSBA as we do these projects, these capital projects. And you mentioned ADA compliance, and I've learned a lot about that. That if we're doing within a 3-year window, we're reaching a third of the total assessed value of that building with projects. You need to bring the entire building up to ADA compliance. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. Including the outdoors, which is millions of dollars, which people don't realize, even in our one-level buildings. So we have submitted a statement of interest with the MSBA. So I don't know, Dr. Blaisdell, if you want to talk about that a little bit.
Sure. So far, school committee and the select board at the town have been extremely supportive. Hedge and Cold Spring are two of our older buildings in town, and they're not ADA compliant. They have systems, HVAC systems that are quite old. They need quite a bit of repairs as we go forward. We're going to continue to make sure that we maintain those buildings to make sure that our kids and staff are safe in those buildings. But we're also looking at delaying because some of those buildings might need new roofing, or windows were done a couple of years ago, but some of the HVAC systems, actually, it's not even really. Do they call them HVAC systems when they're boilers and so forth?
Sure.
Okay,
It
we'll go
is.
with
It's a form of it.
Okay. So those are going to need some major repairs, and we're going to need to spend some major money. So it was really decided to see if we could put in for a new building that would be ADA compliant and have updated systems and so forth. So we worked with AI3 to do a feasibility study or a condition study to look at our buildings, and does it make sense? Does it make sense to move forward and put in a letter of interest to the Massachusetts School Building Authority? And by looking at this study, these buildings don't have necessarily the space available. They're overcrowded. If you walk in, they don't look overcrowded, but when you really start looking at the buildings and where kids are learning and what spaces they have accessible to them, they are overcrowded. They don't necessarily meet the current standards of today. So we wrote a letter of interest to replace those buildings and hopefully combine them into one. Probably we'd have to figure out where, but it most likely maybe a big Cold Springs campus because it's larger. It's almost 8 acres of land where Hedge is only about 2. And so school committee supported that. The select board supported that. We submitted the letter about a month or 2 ago. We met with to be part of the senior study. So the Massachusetts School Building Authority came out. They looked at both buildings. They asked a lot of questions just to get a better feel of in regards to, is this project something worth moving forward? We don't know yet. We hope to find out at the end of November, beginning of December, to see if we're invited to go to the next stage, which would then really look at a study in regards to feasibility and does it make sense? Where does it make sense? What does it make sense to build a new building? Does it make sense to add on to the buildings and renovate? So they really look at all aspects of that building and does it make sense to knock it down and build a new one, or does it make sense to renovate? And so we're anxiously awaiting the next steps and seeing if we're invited to go to the next stage. But we were very happy to have that visit.
Yes.
I think
And in preparation for that acknowledgement, maybe the invitation into their meeting is we've submitted for cap plan for that assessment.
Yeah.
So that's in place in our cap plan, and if in the event that we are invited into that MSBA meeting.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, and I think, to the taxpayers out there, in terms of when you think about when we're prioritizing funding for facilities, that will cost, obviously that's going to cost millions of dollars for a new building, but we'd be looking at consolidating. And it also allows us to shift other capital funds that we get to the other buildings, which we still have some aging facilities. So by reducing the amount of aged facilities and prioritizing other buildings with capital funds, it, I think, allows us to really make sure that our dollars are being spread out and being as responsible as we can.
And it's
with the
also just
taxpayer
an
dollars.
equitable thing, too. I mean, our students are learning in different ways in those schools than they are in our other elementary schools. You've got, like you said, the space. Maybe a classroom doesn't look crowded, but if you need to be taken out of the classroom and, a little extra help in reading, or if you have a specialist that you need to see, there's not that space that we may have in other schools. You might be in like a tiny little closet, or in some cases, not necessarily a stairwell, but something that feels very much like a stairwell. And you're having your services there, and that's just not equitable when you're a student being taken out for additional. I don't know.
Support. Yeah.
Thank you.
And that kind of went to my next conversation piece, is like why families should be concerned about facilities, because it's not just about the heating, the ventilation, but it's the educational experience, right? And we do have varied facilities, very well maintained.
Yes.
To your point, Michelle, the facilities really drives the educational experience, not only for the students, but for the teachers and the families. Their community spaces. And when we have old buildings that were built 114 years ago, in some cases, they weren't designed with the sort of educational model of today, right? And certainly the community needs of today.
Yeah.
So it is an equity issue, and how this will not only be good for the taxpayer in terms of like prioritizing our funds, but it's also good for the community as well, the general community.
Students to learn better and get the support they need. Not they get the support, I should say, but support in the correct environment.
Yeah, in the space that they
of the
deserve.
2024 environment.
In comparison to their peers and,
Yes.
and colleagues across our district.
Yes.
For sure. We have tried to, I think, curb costs in facilities over the years too, and I thought we could talk a little bit about energy and what we've done in terms of energy efficiency and some of the projects that we've done.
Sure. I forget, probably maybe 10 years ago. I think it's more than that, actually.
More, I think it was like 11, 12 maybe.
We contracted with, went out to bid and contracted with several solar farms. So we have 2 solar farms in different communities. We're purchasing electricity that's created for 8 cents a kilowatt hour. We can't do that at our own homes by any stretch of the imagination. There's also solar on the roofs of both north and south, and the town is just recently, within the past year or so, entered into a contract for another solar field. So we're getting the benefits of that. So we pay. We've saved millions and millions and millions of dollars in energy because of these solar fields. It's I think it's up there, 6 to 9 million or something like that. And so it saves us quite a bit. For next year, we're in the process of budgeting. And right now, the budget that we're looking at we would spend about $2.7 million on our electricity for next fiscal year. But with all the credits and so forth, the budget's only coming out to be about $1.2 million for purchasing electricity. If you or I were to buy that same electricity, we'd be paying $2.7 million at our homes. But with all the solar, it's going to cost us about $1.2 million for the district and the town. And the town right now is also looking at some additional solar projects, solar canopies at 3 of our schools, and they're looking at the old Cedarville landfill and a couple other locations. And if that project move forward, which I think it will, we're looking at some additional significant savings as well. So that 1.2 will probably be even less moving forward. Obviously, it won't be in place for next year, but they're looking at maybe for the next couple of years.
Yeah, that's great. And I imagine if we're fortunate enough to get in the queue for a new building, that there's a lot of like net zero projects taking place right now. So really trying to
Absolutely.
again look at curbing our costs. And I've seen that in my 17 years, at central office here in Plymouth. We used to spend like $3+ million in 2008 on utilities, and to watch that go down on an annual basis. And I think it's the right thing to do. So anything we can do to kind of curb our costs for the taxpayers and to be as green as we possibly can is good.
And one other aspect to that is in HVAC, we're always trying to involve mass save, energy incentives into our projects to defer some of those costs as well. So every one of our HVAC projects, we're working with town climate resiliency. We're working with, like I said, mass save, some of these other groups to help us find some of that money that's out there in the state. You just got to find it and attach it to our projects, and that's going to help shed some of that cost of these large, costly projects.
Absolutely. So what should taxpayers do if they want to stay informed and involved in the process regarding facilities and finances?
I think one of the biggest pieces is obviously, I know that some families have reached out to Matt in regards to some recommendations they have, and Matt's been very receptive, and obviously can't necessarily make every accommodation because there's limited funds available, but he's been able to address some of their concerns, and it's been great. Thank you for
Absolutely.
reaching out. And I know the families have appreciated that.
Yeah, and I'm happy to do that. I want families to feel safe with their children in our schools and be proud of their schools. And if there's something that's catches their eye all the time, like, man, I wish that would be fixed. Like, much prefer to read it in an email than on a Facebook post.
Very true. And then it's really just paying attention during school committee when they were looking at capital plans, during town meeting in the spring to kind of see where we are with funding. It'd be great if we could get this up so people could see this, but it's not an electronic document; it's a hard copy. But really, just following along and talking to their principals, talking to Matt in regards to different projects and so forth, and know that we're trying to create buildings where we want our kids and our families to come and learn and just enjoy.
Yeah, this has been great, and I know there's a lot of information on your page and the website, and we're always available for questions, comments, suggestions too. So this has been great. So that will do it for us today. I just want to again thank the local scene for allowing us to come into your studio and share with you, our community, a little bit more about our school operations and finances. Maintaining our schools is not just about keeping buildings in good shape. It's about ensuring our children have safe, modern, effective spaces for learning. It's really a community effort that requires foresight, planning, and investment. We encourage you to stay involved and stay informed about how you can support these efforts. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at the contact information below. Also, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions regarding anything that we've shared, please email us at hometownvoices@plymouth.k12.ma.us. Thanks again for joining us.